My name is Emily Carter, and I was 28 years old when I finally understood something about my childhood. For almost 8 years, my family celebrated my younger sister's birthday on my birthday. The cake had her name on it, the decorations were for her, the guests came for her. And somehow I became the person who helped everyone else enjoy the day. I used to think that was the worst part. It wasn't. The worst part came years later, when my parents finally showed up at my door with the apology I had spent most of my life waiting to hear. But that apology came with something else. A truth about my sister. A truth that made me question almost everything I remembered about my family. Welcome to Sit With Me a While. This is a quiet place for stories about family, loneliness, memories, and the things people carry for years without saying out loud. If you've ever felt like you were standing in the room while everyone else was being seen, maybe you'll understand Emily's story. Because sometimes the deepest hurt isn't being hated. Sometimes it's feeling like nobody noticed you were there. My story began in a small 2-story house outside Dayton, Ohio. Before I turned 10, I thought my family was normal. My mother, Susan, owned a small flower shop in town. My father, Mark, repaired heating and air conditioning systems. He wasn't a man of many words. Some days, I think he could go through an entire afternoon using only a few sentences. And then there was me. I was the easy child. I did well in school. I kept my room clean. I didn't ask for much. I learned early that if I needed something, I could usually figure it out myself. Looking back, I understand where that came from. Between my 6th and 9th birthdays, my mother went to the hospital several times. She was pregnant each time, and each time she came home without a baby. Nobody really explained what had happened. Adults often think children don't understand things if they aren't told the details. But children notice. They notice when their mother cries in the bathroom. They notice when their father becomes quiet. They notice when everyone suddenly starts whispering. Whenever my mother came home from the hospital, my father would put his hand on my shoulder and say, "Be easy on your mom this week." So I was. I became very good at being easy. I made my own lunches. I got my clothes ready for school. I stopped asking questions. I even signed some of my school papers myself because asking my mother to do it felt like one more thing she had to deal with. I didn't know it at the time, but I was learning how to disappear. And when you're a child, you don't think of that as disappearing. You think you're helping. You think you're being good. My 9th birthday was simple. My mother made a lemon cake. My name was written across the top in blue icing. My father sang to me, badly, but I loved it. I remember sitting at that table and thinking I had everything I needed. That was the last birthday that felt completely mine for a long time. The following year, everything changed. I was 10. We had a small birthday party in our backyard. There were a few kids from school, a folding table, cupcakes, and my grandmother helping in the kitchen. My mother was 7 months pregnant. Nobody talked much about the baby. I think everyone was afraid to hope. Then, while I was eating a hot dog, my mother suddenly stood up. She held her stomach. Everything became quiet. Her water had broken. She was only 31 weeks pregnant. My father rushed her to the hospital. The birthday decorations were still hanging from the fence when they left. My grandmother stayed behind with the children. That night, my little sister was born by emergency C-section. Her name was Sophie. She was tiny, so tiny that my father later said he was afraid to touch her. She spent weeks in the hospital. My parents practically lived beside her incubator, and I went to stay with my grandmother. One night, my grandmother lit a candle on one of the cupcakes left over from my birthday. She told me to make a wish. I remember exactly what I wished for. I wished my sister would live. She did. The doctors called her a fighter. The nurses called her a miracle. And my mother held on to those words with everything she had. After so many losses, there was finally a baby who survived. A baby born on the same date as me. My mother started to believe that the date meant something. Maybe it did. But from that point on, my birthday slowly stopped belonging to me. Sophie stayed in the hospital for several weeks. During that time, my grandmother became the person who looked after me. She packed my lunches. She helped with homework. She made sure I got to school. Every few days, my parents took me to the hospital to see my sister. I remember standing beside the incubator and looking at her tiny body. There were wires everywhere. She was so small. But I loved her. I want to make that clear. I never hated my sister. She was a baby. She hadn't done anything wrong. The problem wasn't Sophie. The problem was everything the adults built around her. One Sunday, a nurse noticed me sitting in the corner doing homework. She looked at my mother and said, "She's such an easy child. You could almost forget she's here." My mother smiled. It was one of the first real smiles I'd seen from her in weeks. And I noticed. Even at 10 years old, I noticed. I thought, if being quiet makes mom happy, then I'll be quiet. If needing nothing makes things easier, then I'll need nothing. So I became very good at being easy. When Sophie finally came home, our whole neighborhood seemed to celebrate. People came outside, neighbors watched from their porches, our church talked about her, people brought food to the house. My mother told the story again and again. The difficult pregnancy, the hospital, the tiny baby, the long weeks in the NICU, the miracle. And I was always somewhere in the background. I had been there too. It had been my birthday. But in the story everyone told, I became part of the date rather than part of the family. Soon, photographs of Sophie were everywhere. One of her hospital bracelets was framed and placed on the living room wall. It went exactly where one of my school pictures had been. My picture was moved to the piano. My mother said it was temporary. It wasn't. The bracelet stayed on a wall. My picture eventually ended up in a drawer. That became a strange picture of our home. Proof that Sophie had survived was displayed for everyone to see. Proof that I was growing up quietly was put away. Then came my 11th birthday. I had asked for a lemon cake. I wanted 3 friends from school to come over. Nothing big, nothing expensive. I had already learned not to ask for much. When I came downstairs that morning, the backyard was covered in pink. Pink balloons, pink decorations, pink ribbons, and hanging across the yard was a large banner. It said, Sophie. It was her first birthday. Technically, it was mine too. But nobody seemed to remember that. By noon, there were dozens of people in our yard. Most of them were there to celebrate Sophie. There were pictures from the hospital. There was music. There was a large cake. My 3 friends stood around awkwardly with presents meant for me. But even they could see what was happening. My mother had made me a cake too. A simple grocery store vanilla cake. It sat at the far end of the table. After the big celebration, someone finally noticed it. I remember hearing an aunt ask, "Whose birthday is it?" I didn't answer. That night, I found my mother in the kitchen. I asked her why Sophie's party had been held on my birthday. She looked genuinely surprised. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You've already had 10 birthdays, Emily. Sophie almost didn't get one." Then she kissed my forehead and went upstairs. I stood there alone. I was 11 years old. And I did the math in my head. 10 birthdays. That was apparently my share. I'd already had mine. My sister had almost died. So maybe I owed her the next ones. I didn't know how to explain why that hurt. I just knew it did. My father wasn't much help. He wasn't a cruel man. That almost made things harder. He saw what was happening. But he didn't want to fight with my mother. At every party, he stayed near the grill. He cooked. He smiled. He kept the peace. And sometimes keeping the peace is another way of letting someone else get hurt. Over the next few years, the rules became normal. Sophie opened presents first. Sophie picked the theme. Sophie blew out the candles. And I was usually assigned to take care of her. Watch your sister. Take her inside. Stay with her. Help her. I became the helper at my own birthday. One year after everyone had gone home, my father quietly handed me a wrapped present. It was something I had wanted for months. He smiled and said, "Happy birthday, kiddo." Then he looked toward the house. "Don't tell your mother." He was afraid it would upset her. I thanked him. I meant it. But years later, I understood something. A gift you have to hide doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like an apology nobody is brave enough to say out loud. The person who saw me most clearly was my grandmother. Her name was June. She was short, stubborn, and always smelled faintly of lavender. She didn't like what was happening. And she wasn't afraid to show it. At my 11th birthday, she watched everything from a folding chair. She didn't say much, but she noticed. Later that night, she called me onto the front porch. She had an old instant camera. She told me to sit on the steps. I did. She took a picture. Then she looked at it carefully. She nodded. "Someone should have proof that you turned 11, she said. That sentence stayed with me. The next year, she did it again. Same porch, same steps, same camera. She took another picture. And the year after that, another. She kept them in a shoebox. On the lid, she wrote, "Proof of Emily." I didn't understand how important those pictures were at the time, but my grandmother understood. She knew that while everyone else was celebrating my sister's survival, someone needed to remember that I was growing up too. And she tried to remind my parents of that. One year, I heard her talking to my mother through the screen door. She wasn't yelling. Grandma June rarely needed to yell. She simply said, "One afternoon. That's all I'm asking. One afternoon for the other girl." My mother answered with the same words I had heard for years. "Sophie has been through so much." That sentence had become the answer to everything. If Sophie broke something, she had been through so much. If Sophie acted out, she had been through so much. If Sophie needed more attention, she had been through so much. And slowly I began to understand something that scared me. It wasn't just that my parents had made my birthday about Sophie. They were building the entire family around her. And I was learning to live around the edges. By the time I was 12, my birthday cake had become cupcakes. Sophie's cake was bigger. Her party was more important. And everyone said the same thing. Emily doesn't mind. I never told them that I did. Because by then, I had learned that saying you were hurt could make you feel like the selfish one. At 13, relatives started sending birthday cards addressed only to Sophie. One aunt even sent me a separate card a week late. She apologized for getting the dates mixed up. But the dates weren't mixed up. They were the same. That was the whole problem. By then, I had stopped inviting friends to my birthday. It was too embarrassing to explain. Instead, I started doing something strange. I began counting. On my birthday, I would keep track of how many times my parents said my name. Not happy birthday, just my name, Emily. The year I turned 13, I waited all day. At midnight, the number was 0. The next year, I stopped counting. I'd like to say I stopped because I finally chose myself. The truth is simpler. I stopped because I finally understood that counting wasn't going to make anyone see me. And while I was learning how to disappear, Sophie was learning something too. She was learning that the whole family would move around her. She was still young, so I don't blame her. But there were signs. When I won second place at a school science fair, I brought my project home. I had built a small model showing the water cycle. I was proud of it. For one evening, my parents actually looked at something I had made. They asked questions. They smiled. I remember how good that felt. The next morning, the project was broken. The clouds had been pulled apart. The tubing was snapped. The ribbon was in the trash. Sophie had destroyed it. She was only 4. When my mother found me standing there with the broken pieces in my hands, she looked uncomfortable. Then she said the sentence I had heard so many times. "She's been through so much, honey." I looked at the broken project. Then I looked at my mother. And for the first time, I wondered if that sentence was really meant to protect Sophie, or if it was protecting my parents from having to deal with what was happening. Around that same time, Sophie had problems at preschool. She hurt another child. The school suggested that my parents speak with a specialist. Our doctor suggested the same thing, but my mother didn't want to hear it. A diagnosis to her meant that the miracle wasn't perfect, so she changed doctors. She told relatives that nobody understood Sophie. And slowly, everyone learned not to question anything. The miracle could not have a problem. So the problem became everyone else's. By 14, I had stopped asking for parties. I didn't want balloons. I didn't want a big cake. I didn't want people pretending the day was mine. Instead, I decided I wanted one simple thing. Dinner. Just the 4 of us. A quiet Tuesday night at a local pizza place. 1 hour. No decorations. No guests. No birthday theme. Just my parents, my sister, and me. I planned it carefully. Because by then, asking for something from my family felt like planning a robbery. I didn't want much. I only wanted one evening where my birthday felt like my birthday. I didn't know yet that this simple request would become the beginning of the moment when I finally stopped being the quiet girl who accepted everything. I thought I was asking for dinner. I was really asking my family to notice that I was still there,